So thank you to Martha for joining us. Martha is Associate Director of the Center for African Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. Trained in international studies and political science, she's taught in California, Ohio, and Madrid. Her research has focused on agrarian politics in Sudan, gender and development in sport in Africa. She's a board member of Sports Africa and Soccer Without Borders. A veteran of Title IX battles in the US, she's been involved with soccer, football most of her life as a player, coach, scholar, and fan. So thanks, Martha, and take it away.
Okay, and I think, whoops, just trying to make sure I get the right screen to share. I think I have that, right? Do you see the PowerPoint now? I have too
Yes.
many screens here that
Yeah,
when I
we
do it,
see.
I'm not sure always which screen I've got. So the video, and I have to say, I've been working really hard on something that was the MasterCard Foundation was mentioned earlier. We run the scholars program at Berkeley. We bring African students to Berkeley, and the travel ban has just totally upended a lot of things we're doing. So I hope that my presentation is coherent. I have to the previous speaker had a wonderfully coherent one, so I'm hoping mine is as coherent. But I felt that that video kind of pulled together a lot of the themes that I want to tackle here. And that's, African youth through their creativity, through their innovation, um, addressing challenges through all sorts of means, sport, music, art, and fun. I am actually going to be focusing mostly on sport, but I wanted to just get lay the groundwork for why it's important to look at African youth and their influence on global dynamics. So a few slides here, and I think it's really important that we understand, and it was mentioned earlier of how big the youth element is for not just Africa, but for the globe. So this chart here shows that by the end of this century, the working populations of the planet, the youth, are going to be mostly African. And this has changed a lot from the 1950s. So, Africa is really coming into its own. Some other charts, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it. If you like charts, there's all these sorts of charts there that show the change in the working ages of population. And you can see in the one that's on the right, the red there, by 2035, even very soon, the working population on the planet is going to be African. So we are going to rely on Africans for solving a lot of the problems on the planet and for making sure that the rest of us who are getting older, and I'm retiring in a few weeks, so that the rest of us, are able to survive. So the dependency ratios are really we're going to be dependent on Africans. Here's just another view of it. It's a little blurry, but just different visualizations help people understand that Africans again will be very important. One thing I want to say, and I'll get to this back at the end, a lot of those earlier charts came from demographic work that was done back in 2013, 2014, 2015, and things have changed, believe it or not, in the last decade or two. And so these are some new projections here for even the world population. And underneath this is also the African population, which I'll get there again soon, is that there will be, some changes since then, but I'll return to that at the very end. What I want to talk about here is just throw out a few things and people can follow up on it. And I have to say that if it weren't for my children, I would not be as familiar with some of these folks because they're the ones that have the playlists that get me into it. So Burna Boy, for instance. And I think if anybody doesn't know Burna Boy, I'm not going to go no videos from Burna Boy, but you have to. Burna Boy is the top of everything globally right now, pretty much. And then there's Tyla, slightly younger, maybe a decade younger. But from South Africa. So Burna Boy is Nigerian, Tyla is from South Africa, again, making huge impact musically on the globe. The woman behind the power behind the video that we just showed, Elsa Wameo. And one thing that I want to point out about her, she's born in Kenya, But then her family moved to Australia. So she is one of those who um, is it went back and goes back and forth. So she's very globally adept. A lot of her music originally came out of her feeling like an outcast in Australia. She, grew up speaking Swahili but yet where did she exist in Australia? So she goes back and finds herself in Kenya. And then I don't know if any of you are Eurovision fans, but I just want to throw this in there because it's not so big in the United States, but Eurovision is huge in some parts of the world, particularly Europe, although Australia participates. But so this person, Claude, did not win this year. He was the Netherlands entry. The winner was Austrian, and actually the person who won is half Filipino, so it's a very global type of thing. But Claude originally is a refugee from the DRC, and when he was 9 or so, his family went to the Netherlands, and then he was chosen by whoever does these things to be the entry for Eurovision. And as I said, he came in 12, so he did pretty well. And the song "C'est la vie" is actually I recommend you go look it up, and it's definitely a Eurovision song, but there's that. Then, speaking of the diaspora, Shabuzi. Shabuzi was born in the United States, but his parents are Igbo from Nigeria. He actually spent part of his middle school years, and we just had a middle school teacher. He spent part of his middle school years in Nigeria, and he is one of the top artists in the United States and many different genres, but country music. And I just love this, the Great American Roadshow. And his name, Shabuzi, is actually a mispronunciation of his Igbo name, Chibueze. So there's lots of stories about Shabuzi here. If you don't know his music, really go and look at his music. But I love this way where Africans and those in the African diaspora and the first and second generation Africans are really taking the global scene in music and art and things. So, but my specialty is sport, so I'm going to turn to that now. And um, you may know that like this last year in the New York Marathon, I think the top 3 and 4, the top, well, actually top 5 of men, top 4 of women, I think were all from African countries, East African countries, and they took all the prizes. Um, Bakoji, and this picture here is from Bakoji, a place that I was able to visit, and I was able to meet sort of the person who started coaching a lot of the famous runners from Bakoji. But there is this a lot of effort that goes into people ask, well, how are they running so fast? It must be something genetic. It's actually hard work. It's actually really hard work and a lot of training that gets them into this, and such that this picture here is from Iten in Kenya. The success of the East African runners is now drawing runners globally. So this is from a tourist site, go to Kenya and run. And so they have all these tourist camps and things like that where people from around the world who want to improve their running go and run with the champions from Kenya. For the academic side of things, I just want to recommend this book by Michelle Sykes, Kenya's Running Women, from Michigan State Press. And it's the first history of African women runners. So definitely check it out. And while I don't have the list completely ready yet, I will, when they share the lists out, I'll have a list for that. I'll have a reference for that as well. Anyway, so we know running is really important. Just again, how important the Africans are I just got this from the Running World magazine. So it's like hot off the press. All but one of the top times for women are African runners. Now, yes, some of them like Sifan Hassan is Netherlands, but of African background. And then on the men's side, the same thing, but they're all African on the men's side. So, and East African, although there are some, Moroccan and other in the long distance. And yeah, so I did want to, in terms of the sport though, and this is one of the issues where there's global impact. And something to, I'm not going to go too deep into this controversy right now, but you may have heard of Caster Semenya from South Africa, a great runner, but the World Athletics has been banning her from playing because they say she has too much testosterone. And in order for her to run, she would actually have to take drugs that would reduce her levels of testosterone into what somebody deems a acceptable limit for her to run. And so it's a reverse of the, anti-doping kind of thing. But it's basically asking her to destroy her body in order to run. Then these other two women in the last Olympics were also, they were going to run in the 400 meters. They're young teenagers from Namibia, but then it was found, their testosterone is too high too. So they had to switch. The band of the testosterone is between 400 meters and the mile. So they had to switch to the 200. And there's a lot of details here, but I think one of the issues to raise or to think about is how, especially when African women are participating in global sports, there's a transgression against what the ideal female is. What should a female be? What should a female look like? And I think these things will continue to be litigated, and these things are definitely going to courts of law, but also in the way people understand what is femininity, what is a woman, and it's largely Black and brown bodies that present this challenge to sort of establish norms, which, as we know, tend to be established norms of from the global north, from Europe and from the United States, from North America. So there's that case. I'm going to turn to basketball really quickly here because many people, I guess the NBA finals are just happening, and you'll see that the NBA has a lot of people from all over the world. The NBA has been moving into the African continent. They have the BAL League, and that tournament is on right now, so you can watch it if you want. The African Basketball Leagues, that's for the men. And then the women's tournament, the Afro-Basket tournament, is going to be happening soon in Cote d'Ivoire. I've done some research on women's basketball in Africa, and it's amazing. It's exciting. It tends to be the women tend to stay inside the continent, although I shouldn't say that. They do migrate to play in Europe, a little bit in the United States. We have had some WNBA players from the African continent, but on the men's side, we also see a lot of African players. But I think in terms of global impact, in terms of basketball, it is interesting that when you look at, this is from FIBA, which is the International Basketball Federation, which is based in Europe, of course. This is, again, hot off the press in terms of their migration numbers. Most of those migrating are coming from the United States. And then you can see here the bubbles of who is coming from Africa. And this supposedly is both men and women in the data that they have here, although I wasn't able to download the data sets themselves to look at that. But one of the interesting things, and this is maybe something to build on in the future, is that the African continent is actually rather stable in terms of those who are going out and coming in for basketball. And I'll give you an example. So I studied basketball, women's basketball in Senegal, and it was a very popular sport. This was back in the 90s, and then through the early 2000s. Senegalese women's basketball was top on the continent. They always won the tournaments. It was the big deal. And in fact, in Senegal, women's basketball is as popular very popular, up there with wrestling and men's football. But in recent years, the Senegalese team hasn't been doing well. The team that has been doing well is the Nigerian team. So the Nigerian team keeps on topping in these tournaments. Well, what's happening there? There's a lot of American Nigerians who are using that ability to have two passports and then go play for the Nigerian national team. So they are basically raised in the United States, raised on the basketball opportunities or the sporting opportunities in the United States, but they're going to play in Nigeria. So I think it's an interesting way that that Africa is not just sending athletes out, but athletes are coming into the continent as well. Um, so football, soccer, I call it football because I've spent so much time thinking about it on the African continent, and in Europe and in other parts of the world where everybody calls it football, is what many people think about in terms, and especially in the men's game. And if you watch and the any of the European leagues, it's really you just see the number of Africans involved, and either Africans who have migrated recently, born in the continent, or Africans who are in the diaspora. Maybe they were born in Europe, but then their parents, or at least one of their parents, was from Africa, and so often they will claim the citizenship of the African country in order to be able to play internationally on a team there. So sometimes you even have brothers. One brother will be playing for Germany and the other brother will be playing for Ghana. So you have different things like that. But anyway, I'll get, if I don't have a prize to give, but if anybody can name all those folks, in the chat, that would be fun. Some of you may be able to do that. So of course, I will just say I had to have Mo Salah there. I love Liverpool. I'm very happy from what happened. So this season and anyway, so Mo Salah. The interesting thing with migration, there is a lot of discussion of how, in at least in the circles that I'm in the numbers of Africans that are the brawn drain, the football drain, the foot drain of all the Africans that are leaving the continent, which is true. But in terms of overall global migration, and this is again this was updated just May 1st. So this is men. This is only men. But where the migration is happening, Brazil is the largest, sending the most people across. And then actually France, it's interesting. There's a lot of people from France, many of whom are of African descent who are going to other leagues. Obviously, Nigeria is a big source. West Africa is mainly the source for men who are migrating to play elsewhere. I will say, and one interesting thing about African men's migration in global football. There's just a book book that's come out about African men playing in China. So that may be something interesting to look at. I was doing some research on sport and development in general a few years ago, and I went to Timor-Leste, which actually on this map, you can see the dot. If you see where Australia is, and you go up a little bit, there's a little dot on that it's Indonesia, but it's that last little island there is cut in half, and Timor-Leste is a separate country there, a Portuguese-speaking country. So I was there looking at youth sport and development there. And I kept on running into all these Ghanaians. There were 15, 16 Ghanaian male footballers there playing professionally in Timor-Leste. There were a few from some other African countries, one or two from Latin American countries. But it was really interesting how these West Africans, mainly Ghanaians, ended up in all places of Timor-Leste. And of course, they thought I was an agent, and they asked me to try to help them get a better deal someplace, but that's not what I do. In any case, the African migrations, I just wanted to put that into context. And again, if you look at this is from a very recent report from this observatory, you can see where African countries rank in terms of the numbers of people that they're sending someplace else to play football. And this is between 2020 and 2025. So Brazil, France, Argentina, England are first, but Nigeria is number 8, Ghana, Senegal, Ivory Coast, Cameroon, Mali, all West African countries. Yes, Egypt, we have some great Egyptians, of course, but the Southern Africa and East Africa, even, I mean, there's Moroccans too, but that's the migration, that's how it fits. And this is men's migration. So it is interesting, though, to dig in deep to see where are the people going. And it's just, I won't spend much time on this, but to see where Nigerian footballers are migrating to. Czech Republic, Turkey, Israel. Interesting. I mean, we definitely see them if you watch the big leagues, the Bundesliga or the English Premier League or La Liga, you see some in there, but it's actually to these other leagues, Armenia, you know. So I just wanted to quickly share that. And this is on the women's side, just to show that for the most part, the in the women's game globally, the Africans are not they do migrate, and there's some interesting literature if people are interested about Africans who do migrate, particularly to Europe, to play. But you see Nigeria is all the way down here, and whereas the United States, the women they're going all over the world to play. Canadians, Sweden, Germany, you know. So anyway, context for the women's side. I want to switch gears a little bit though, and then talk about the impact of African women footballers. So the numbers may not be that big, but there's still a lot of impact. So this was on my son's birthday, May 11th. I watched as much football as I can. And so this game was happening, Kansas City Current versus Bay FC. Bay FC is the local team here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was really pleased to see that the two people that ESPN chose as players on opposite teams are both Africans. I'll get to their names, but if anybody can put their names in the chat if you happen to know who they are. Again, um, I don't have the a prize to give you, but if you can name the players, we'll get to who they are in a minute. But anyway, I was pleased to see that. Here you go. Tema Chawinga, who's from Malawi, and Rachel Kundanaji, who is from Zambia. Okay, so they're representing the face of this US leagues, women's leagues game. Of course, Kansas City beat Bay FC, and Tabitha Chawinga scored one of the goals there. So what is important, though, here, this is a chart from Wikipedia, which the one thing I like about Wikipedia is that you can pull together information. Sometimes, yes, it might be wrong, but there aren't commercials and ads in there, so you get it quickly. So this is a chart of the transfer fees paid for women footballers globally. So what are the top fees paid? You'll see the top one is Naomi Girma, and then that just recently she went to Chelsea. And Chelsea, you know, they won the league and all that sort of thing there. Rachel Kudinaji, who plays for Bay FC, just before that, she had the top from Zambia. And I know Agnes feels like she's happy about this flying the flag, but to get the top transfer fee. Now that's pretty amazing. Now there's underneath that there's a Brazilian, but then there's Barbara Banda also from Zambia. So I just that these women from African small, I mean, in terms of footballing, relatively small, are getting such transfer fees. I think there's something interesting there. And then what I would also, so those two, but what I also point out that Naomi Girma, she's an American, and she has the top fee so far, but she is an African first generation immigrant. So her parents came from Ethiopia. And I don't know if I was just watching the games. There were friendlies that just took place, and Naomi Girma is one of the best players, and she's a defender, but she's so good. So which is one reason why she gets that top fee. So anyway, basically 3 Africans in the top 5 of women's football. I also wanted to mention Malawian Tema Chawinga again, who has a sister who plays in Europe. Again, Malawi is a very small country, and yet she this last year got the Golden Boot. She was voted the NWSL Most Valuable Player. I'm not going to read all that, but she is an amazing player, and one reason why Kansas City Current is pegged to win the league this year. So one of the things that I also want to in terms of like innovation. So you have soccer talent, you have football talent, basketball talent, running talent. You go out in the world and you make a mark. But okay, so then what changes? all of these women give back to their communities. It is true for male footballers too, but I think particularly for the African women, almost all of them that I'm aware of, they all go when they become successful, they create foundations, they go back and they give back. So Barbara Banda had a tournament recently, well, 2021 back in Zambia. Asisat Oshoala, who is a Nigerian who also plays for BFC. She used to be on Barcelona. She also has a foundation, an academy back in Nigeria. Um, oh, why am I mentioning? Okay, so let me just go. Yes, so they do give back. Just some background on women's football within Africa. Um, Morocco seems to be coming forward. They're hosting all the tournaments. There was a futsal tournament that they won, but Tanzania came in second. Um, the biggest tournaments on the continent are the African Cup of Nations. The Women's African Cup of Nations will happen in July, but it's actually postponed from 2024. And until just a few days ago, there was no match schedule announcement on there. So my point, and I'm not going to go through all of this here, but my point is for the women's side, the Confederation doesn't really pay that much attention to them. Whereas, and I'm not going to go through the details here, the men's side is going to play also in Morocco later in December. And you have the match schedules, you have the calendar, you have, all these details already up online for the men's side because that's what people seem to care about. All right, I'm going to stay on sport, but I'm going to switch to the grassroots side right now and talk about the impact globally that the grassroots sports programs can have on the continent. So, and in full disclosure, I am on the board of Soccer Without Borders. Lindsay had mentioned that when she introduced me. So there is that, but I have an inside knowledge of what's going on here. And I just want to talk about specifically some of the gender equity projects they're doing. The sports and development organizations do a lot of other things. They do climate change. They work on literacy. They work on nutrition. They do lots of different things. But I'm going to be focusing here on gender equity. So one of the things that the organizations that I'm most familiar with and have been involved with, Soccer Without Borders, which has a hub in Uganda. It also has hubs in the United States. Moving the Goalpost is based in Kilifi, Kenya. There's a focus on girls there. So with Soccer Without Borders in Uganda, it's for boys and girls. They serve a refugee population in Kampala, but they've made sure that 50% of the participants identify as girls. Whereas if you look across the continent, only 3% of CAF-affiliated football players identify as girls. They've started these Kampala Girls Leagues where they create a safe space that's controlled, that helps girls play the game. So, and it's not just for the Soccer Without Border kids, but it's also for other kids in Kampala. They organize these global goal 5 accelerators, and with the help of Common Goal, with the GIZ and some others, and to bring multiple organizations together. There's a nice video that I have I can share later that gives an overview, and this is covering, and I think I have a piece in the next slide on it. But they also when you talk about gender equity, you're not just talking about women or girls. You have to also talk about men and boys. So what they're doing with both of these organizations is they bring men into it. So Soccer Without Borders, along with a US NGO, Futures Without Violence, is taking this curriculum called Coaching Boys to Men, which was developed here in the United States. And they're refiguring it for the African context and bringing it out into communities, working with boys. And I'll go into that in a little bit more in a minute. Moving the Goalpost also has another program similar to that. And these organizations work together. They know each other and they share a lot. Young Men as Equal Partners, where they bring the young boys in. And I will say, Moving the Goalpost started back in 2020. And initially it was just a girls' league. And they got very successful. And I remember that by 2010, the boys were like, can we play too? And if you know anything about Kenya, Kilifi is a very, very poor part of Kenya relative to Nairobi and other parts. And in terms of gender equity, I mean, it's one of the places where the bottom fell out with colonialism and post-colonialism, and women really suffered a lot, but also young men did too. So tackling these gender equity issues there is a really big thing to deal with. So here's the equal play effect. This is the one where they went with many across many different parts of Africa, and they had different organizations that they were working with to spread the knowledge. Uganda, this is the Ugandan Girls League right here that they just finished up recently. Um, and okay, more about the coaching boys into men. They actually went to Zambia and a couple of other countries, Tanzania, to again spread the word on this, um, to reduce violence against women and change the norms around that. And I just want to highlight Jules Orhola here, who is one of the main um, implementers of this. He initially was a refugee from Democratic Republic of Congo, came to Uganda, joined Soccer Without Borders before he actually hadn't played football. So he started playing when he was there. One of the things that Soccer Without Borders does is they use the game itself within the coaching on the field to teach kids English, so that they can then transfer into school, and they provide bridges so that they can join in Uganda to join the Ugandan curriculum there. He became a volunteer coach, an instructor. He then went to university in Uganda, got a bachelor's degree, and he came back and joined the staff. And actually, that says 2014. 2024, that's a typo there. In 2024, he became the director. So he came as one of the participants, one of the kids that was, just in that group of kids on the field kicking the ball around. And now he's the director of the organization. So um, and then he's also taking this curriculum, this coaching boys to men curriculum out into the community. Moving the goalposts, I mentioned them a little bit, and they just have done a lot of work over the last 25 years, and they're really well known in Kilifi right now. So I visited them back in 2006, and so they were still fairly new at the time. And in this part of Kenya, young women do not look up at anybody. They look at the ground. But these young women, they were training them to go out and to organize tournaments, to organize leagues. That meant that they had to go and talk to important men in the community and get access to fields and access to space. And I watched these young girls do this. And so I was just amazed, and they have continued to go from strength to strength to strength. And again, influencing many others around them. And I would say that they're a leader globally, not just in Africa, certainly not just in Kenya, but a leader globally in how to use sport. And maybe it could be dancing, it could be music, but how to use something like this to achieve change down the road. They are so well respected now within the Kilifi community. And I just want to mention Isi Akide. So she came from this program. I met her when she was 15. She was an amazing footballer, and she has since she joined the national team, but then went on to play in Turkey and Israel and Greece. And she was the first Kenyan to play in the UEFA Champions League, the women's side, and score there. So she's won all sorts of things. She's now back in Kenya, and like the others, she has started a foundation. And so they just had a tournament recently, and again, promoting for the young girls. She has a book, Chained. It's you have to order it from Kenya, but if anybody is looking for an interesting book with her life story, you might want to look there. But she's also on social media, and you can find a lot on her there. Okay, I know I'm running out of time here. I want to mention, again, innovation. So this is in Rwanda. There was this organization, Football for Hope and Peace and Unity, and I went there several years ago, and I met this woman. You can see her in the blue back there, Erigeni Oskari. She was a former national player, and I just witnessed her run a practice with all these kids of different ages, different male and female. And she managed to keep them going for 2 hours and wove into what she was doing gender equity lessons. And she had a few other people helping her, but she was the one in charge, and it was amazing. So I've gone back to see her since she got married, and so she's not coaching as much recently. But I just the innovation, the ability to use sport to work with young people and to teach lessons on gender equity, I just want to applaud that. I have a few more organizations, and I'll just mention them really quickly. This one is in Kenya, in Marsabit, up in the Somali Kenya area. There's a lot of violence up there, so Fatimata Adan, a lawyer, she left her fancy job in Nairobi, went back there and started an anti-violence organization using football. But women's roles are a big part of it. And I wanted to mention what they're specifically doing is breaking the silence. So they have a couple different programs, but they're addressing female genital mutilation, menstruation, gender-based violence, girls' rights, and things that affect both boys and girls through their efforts. And again, she's if you look up this organization, you look her up, she's on all sorts of boards now and called upon all globally to share what she's learned. I'm just going to mention really quickly this other organization, Delta Cultura, which is in Cape Verde. They do football, but they also do art and dancing, to get back to the title of the talk. And really, they have this notion of education is empathy. So they have been, in their own ways, working, incorporating sport, but also other educational opportunities for the young people in Cape Verde. All right, conclusions. I've got just a few minutes here. I guess gender equity impacts, confidence, leadership skills, safe places, education literacy, nutrition, employment, reproductive health. You can raise the age of marriage, raise the age of the first pregnancy by empowering young women and working with boys on these things. I do want to caution that we don't want to just say gender equity leads to a decrease in fertility, and you'll see where I'm going with that. There's some question of exactly what's going on between gender equity and fertility. But what we do know, and I had mentioned earlier that there have been some revisions in the demographic data, that Africa is the most youthful continent, and it will remain that way. But by the end of the century, there is going to be an increasing population of elderly people on the continent. So one of the things that Africa can innovate on right now, because we know it's coming, and there are people doing this, is to work on the geriatric policies, the policies for old people, and to figure out how to take this huge youth bulge and make sure that those young people who are alive now, who will be old by the end of the century, that there are systems in place to make their lives better. So a lot of the problems that Europe and Japan and others are having with an aging population, I propose that Africa can innovate. And here's, you can see the fertility rates are going to drop even in African countries by 2050. So the fertility rates will drop. The age of people going over 60 is going to increase by the end of the century. And Africa innovates again. Africa came up, South Africa, a woman in Limpopo, which is a province way up in the north of South Africa, comes up with the Grannies football and the Grannies International Football Tournament. And now it's an international thing. People from all over the world come. I'm a grandmother now, so maybe that's what I'll be doing in my retirement, is going to these international tournaments and playing. The next tournament, this one just happened. The next tournament will be in Nairobi. I think that in this tournament, it was, I think, a team from North America that won. So, the women, the older grannies have maybe had more experience playing organized football. But I love the fact that it was an innovation that came out of Africa that is now drawing worldwide attention. So that's it. Questions?
Martha, thank you so much. You have provided such a vivid and widely informative presentation on so many aspects of lives of individuals and institutions across the continent. And I have to note that our presentation on youth, You ended with the grannies, which I thought was very, very, very well chosen. You did the whole lifespan. So now we have some time for some questions. Feel free to write them in the chat box, or like we've done before, to raise your hand. I also have a question for you after we hear from the group. Todd, why don't you unmute yourself and ask your question? And it's great to see you here, Todd.
Thank you, thank you. So first of all, it was great. I currently live in Central Florida, and we're an international school, and our entire men's soccer team is all from the west coast of Africa. I don't know if you've heard of Montverde Academy. But what my question is that a lot of them, amazing kids, and they've definitely changed my life. A lot of them have a hard time going back and forth between home and here. And I don't know if I can't get a good answer of why that happens, but I've had one kid who lost his father, lost his brother, and he did not go home. We have 8 kids here. I think during the summer, it's because they do not go home. They don't go home during holidays or anything like that. I was wondering if you can shed some light on that. By the way, most of the kids, I would say probably over 90% of them, they go off to college. They're just amazing kids, and they appreciate everything, and I mean everything, which makes you appreciate them even more. But I didn't know if you could shed some light on that.
So this is a football academy that they're in, is that correct?
Yes, for high school, yes, ma'am. But
for high school, yeah. Well, yeah, I work with a lot of students from Africa, and the ones I've worked with are either they have been undergraduates or now they're all master's students, and it's sometimes hard for them to go home too. There's travel bans. I mean, right now, no international person who doesn't have full citizenship, and even then, I mean, in the United States, they're advised not to leave the country because you don't know if you're going to be able to get back in or not. And so normally we have students that we would send home over the summer for internships and things like that, and most of them have stayed. So there's that issue. I think, I mean, we do a lot of work on these transition moments, and when you come, that's a huge, intercultural, you're just facing so many things, but you change when you go someplace, and then when you go home again, it's hard. And so people think, oh, you're coming from America, you should be giving us this, you should be giving us that, or they feel like they should be somehow providing, supporting. So that's one thing that makes it hard. Finances also make it hard. Sometimes families are like, why are you coming back? You should be there working. I mean, even if they're in school, maybe they should be, working and sending remittances home. So I think, feeling comfortable and being able to go back and forth and sort of code switch in a larger cultural way, especially if they're younger, I think could be really, really difficult. They would almost need, I think, some mentors, maybe some other people older who have gone back and forth, and maybe, and there are many people now who are moving back and forth a lot. There's sort of this global motion, except when travel bans come up. Yeah, so I understand that issue. I think though, and with the work, Soccer Without Borders does work with immigrant communities here in the United States, and there's a lot of not just coaching soccer, but there's a lot of socio-emotional support that needs to be provided. Something that Soccer Without Border calls trauma-informed coaching is really important. And I mean, I could provide you could look on their website and look at some of the things that they do, and potentially get in touch, because one of the things that Soccer Without Borders does is work to make sure what they're learning is provided. But it is a whole, to really provide that infrastructure it's a holistic program that's not just around training them for soccer. It's got to be a lot more.
Thank you, ma'am. You're awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much, Martha. I'm going to go to one question in the chat box, and then we'll go to you, Soji. So from Judy Lynn, really enjoyed the presentation, fun and uplifting. I fully agree. Great job. Are there any known US celebrities supporting these initiatives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one of the things is through Common Goal. I mean, there's and these are Common Goal is an organization based in Europe, and it's focused on footballers, but they basically get footballers to sign up and then support these various causes. So we have, and it doesn't have to be just an individual, it could be a whole team. So we have a team here, the Oakland Roots, and the whole team is signed up. And so it's like 1% of whatever they, like what the formula is, it goes into these things. So that's like this football mechanism. I know that a Khan, for instance, who's a Ghanaian American based musician, does a lot of things back on the continent. And so yes, I think getting celebrities involved is interesting. What's her name? Mackenzie Phillips. She's the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos. She's been giving money away to all sorts of organizations, and Soccer Without Borders was a recipient of that. $1 million was great. But $1 million goes really quickly when you're helping multiple kids across multiple continents. So, but I think there's probably more than that. Okay. Next.
Thank you, Martha.
Yeah.
Thank you, Elsa. Thank you very much, ma'am. Another great presentation. You hit this one out of the park, too. I teach a course in African studies, African politics. And one of the things I do, the last model, is I talk about the future of Africa. So I have two questions for you. The first one is that because these are fun facts that, the Gen Zs, they can really, it resonates with them. When I tell students, for instance, that, in 2050, I'm talking about, the market thing that you related to, that Nigeria is going to be the third largest population in the world after, China and India. All of a sudden, you get
bigger than the US. Yeah.
That's right, ma'am. Okay. And you go to, YouTube and you get some of these fun facts and so on and so forth. I want to know, in your opinion, because you're so good at this, what do you think is the best way to infuse these fun facts and still remain intellectually relevant, okay, so that the students are not going to, think that, okay, this is just for fun. How do you infuse these fun facts into the curriculum, okay? Because I tell my students that, I show them videos, of Afro beats where, some of these Africans are collaborating with, top artists here, Beyonce and all the rest,
Yeah.
and they get so excited about this, and I get to read some of these things. So I want you to give me more of these,
Yeah. I mean, I would like to say there's a tipping point at some point where it'll be very obvious. I mean, there is also okay. On one hand, you could just say these African enterprises, they're going to be paying your wages soon. So that people are going to be, these companies that are being developed, some of the unicorns that are, we also do a whole bunch of stuff on entrepreneurship. And there was just an event in DC where basically the whole point was on how big I'm trying to come up with it really quickly here. How much African entrepreneurship is going to change things. We had some visitors from Cote d'Ivoire recently, and I've been to Cote d'Ivoire twice this year. And there's some issues there, but they're gung-ho. They are going to be at the forefront of everything. So I think that to some extent, it may not be obvious now, but you could say, well, they might have jobs for you. And the African Diaspora Investment Symposium I mentioned, I just put the link in there that just happened. But there's still, as we know, with the cuts in USAID, and people are dying on the continent right now because of those cuts. Africa in many parts of Africa has been very dependent on development aid, and so there's a lot of shifts that have to happen so that the dependencies aren't there, whether it's dependencies on the global north or China or something, but that there's more of mutual exchange. And as I mentioned, even though the continent is incredibly young right now, most of the leaders, they're 70, 80 years old. Some of them are 90. We're not even sure they're still alive, but they're they're there. So that change in leadership within the continent also needs to change. But I think, it's sort of the drip, drip, drip of giving one example after another after another. So finally it becomes like every day, oh yeah, you're looking for opportunity. Think about Africa, and not in terms of exploiting, but in terms of collaborating and sort of mutual engagement, or some learning something. I mean, M-Pesa, the leapfrogging of technology that will come out of Africa, the solutions that will come out. M-Pesa is one of the examples. My first mobile money experiences were with M-Pesa in Kenya. So, and I think they still do it better than folks here.
Thanks, Martha. And Agnes, we will take you as our last question asker.
Yes.
Then we will close out. So stay with us, everybody.
Agnes, yeah.
Oh, I thought you had somebody in the chat before me.
I think we are out of time. So
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Well, you know what? I want to thank you, Martha, for an enthusiastic, informative, and enlightening presentation. Really, and I mean, this is great, and it's great as the last one because it sends us off in thinking, who are the people, who are the Africans who are making the difference? So my question really or comment is, really related to the classroom and repositioning Africa as we started off. Our series is really repositioning Africa in the classroom. So how might we position Africa in the classroom using the information that you've actually related today? In terms of sport, in terms of music, what are your suggestions in terms of repositioning Africa in the classroom today? And, maybe you may even have some resources that you may actually provide as well.
Yeah, well, and as I'm retiring, I'm kind of exiting that phase of things. Although who knows, maybe I'll go back and teach some more. But and here's something I'm going to say is that, so the last couple courses that I've taught, the classroom, everybody in the classroom has been from African countries. So it's for the MasterCard Foundation scholars, it's at Berkeley, but like the whole class are African students. And even they don't always know enough about Africa. For them, they don't become Africans until they come to the United States, for instance, but they don't know much about the rest of Africa. So I think that it's not something that we can think of just for the non-African community. It is also something that within the African context, to get people to think, about what's going on in other places. So, okay, so how do you get that inside the classroom? Constant examples. I mean, in terms of pedagogical process, the previous speaker, I think, is like leapfrog. She's so far ahead of me in terms of like the actual specific things that you might do in a classroom on this. I mean, I suppose I'm a political scientist by training, and so when I teach about politics, I really love to teach about the politics of sport. It gets people excited, but it can pull them into it in a way. Now there's some specificity about what's going on in sport, but there are ways that you can use them as examples of different inequities or labor relations, migration, or different aspects of it. But I think the music side, that really is interesting to get people in. But I think it's important to not just put these folks up as like icon celebrities or something, but actually to dig into some of the details. So somebody I didn't mention was Sadio Mane, who he was at Liverpool and he used to play with Mo Salah, and then he's off he's off now in the Saudi leagues. But there was a whole series, and I should mention Sports Africa, which I also am involved with. There was a whole series of materials that had come out about him and his work. And so I think, one could build a unit around like different players, maybe not, not to raise them up like hagiographies of these great, wonderful people, but just to look at, how did they get to where they are, but also seeing them as part of the communities that they came from. And Sadio Mane, has definitely stayed in touch. but there's also, you know, again, you don't want to make them into heroes. You have to see them as real people, and they have foibles, and sometimes mistakes are made or things like that. So to try to understand them in context. And I mean, maybe the previous author also, the previous speaker, she also had that ability to, you know, not just say this person is the, you know, is this mythic hero, but is a real person and had changes along the way. So you know, maybe more curriculum could be done looking at specific people, but connecting it to larger themes, I guess. That's my
Thank you,
suggestion.
Martha. Thank you, Martha. I send it back to you, Elsa. I think you have something to say about evaluation or something.
Yes. So first of all, Martha, thank you so much. As you can probably tell from the tenor of our conversations, Martha is one of us in the sense that we have collaborated and she has decades of experience. And so we wish you a wonderful retirement. Today's presentation was centering African agency, which is so deeply what we want to impart today, talking about African knowledge production, talking about the lives of individuals, talking about everything people are doing to act on and change their own lives. And it connects well to the first presentation, Will Shoki, who really talked about how do we envision these futures together. No better example than to see the lives of active youth engaging in sports and organizations to better their worlds. So thank you, Martha, and wishing you a happy retirement. And to all of you in the room, thank you so much for joining us today. The room has remained full all day, which is amazing. I hope it speaks to the power and the relevance of the 4 sessions that we've had today. We love to hear from you live. So if you want to share any comment you have about the day in the chat box now, we totally love to hear from you. And I think it helps solidify a sense of community. So feel free to write any last impressions that you have of the day. I reiterate that your commitment to bringing Africa to the classroom is so crucially important given the changing authoritarian, nationalistic directions the world is taking. Continue to engage with this content seriously for you, for yourself, for your students. Will Shoki at the beginning of the day talked about freedom. This is about freedom making, freedom as a process of making, and it's for both for us and for our students. So we are so happy you were here. In addition to the comments that are trickling into the chat box, we really would love to hear from you more formally. So I'm just dropping an evaluation here in the chat box. Please take 3 minutes. It doesn't take much longer to give us formal feedback on the day today. Your comments matter a lot to us. We will also send this by email to you afterwards. Thank you so much for your engagement. Thank you for being here every day. And I'll pass it on to Agnes if we want to say last few words.
Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody. You know, really, you know, given that everybody has so much to do on their plates and everything, we really, really deeply appreciate your presence here today, this morning, and this afternoon. And as my colleague Elsa has said, we value your and really appreciate your comments. And really, you know, it will help us a lot. And especially given this climate, it helps us a lot for us to show that this is something that is required. This is something that you need, you know, so if you can just put even one word in the chat, that is deeply appreciated. And, you know, we're going to send you the evaluation. Please take 2 minutes. It takes 2-3 minutes to fill that in. But mostly, we really appreciate the thought that you have in terms of teaching about Africa. Repositioning Africa's place in the classroom starts with, you know, if you haven't done it, it just starts with, participating in a session like this one. And we know that whatever you do, however you do it, it may be small, but that goes a long way in transforming students in many, many transformative ways. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you. But please take the moment to just write anything in the chat, and you know, any word of appreciation will be very much appreciated. So thank you.
Thank you all so very much. And please sign up for our newsletter to keep up to date. And we hope to see you in November at the teachers workshop that we will be holding online as well. So it's a great moment to come back together. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.